But I thought it might just be useful to tell you a little bit about my organisation, because I'm going to talk from the perspective of the legal profession and the members of my organisation and their experiences and their responses to the application of GDPR. And the Law Society is a membership body, so that means if you're a solicitor anywhere in England and Wales, you will necessarily have no choice. You're absolutely necessarily a member of the Law Society. And that might mean all sorts of things, actually. That could mean that you're the solicitor working in a local law centre, helping on a refugee case. It could mean that you are a solicitor working in a mid-sized regional firm giving huge amounts of employment and SME-type advice. Or it could mean that you're a lawyer working in one of the Magic Circle firms, so doing huge amounts of M&A activity. Or you might be in-house, working either for a tech co or an organisation, a consultancy maybe. Huge bandwidth, huge amounts of differing experiences. And I think when I look at the application of GDPR and the impacts on the industry of the law and the law itself, actually you have to kind of look at it from all of those perspectives. So, and to just give you an idea, individually, we have something like 170,000 solicitors in England and Wales. And just out of interest, the majority of those are women. Just saying. Anyway, probably moving on, it's probably slightly outside. It's a very, did you say that again, Adrian? What was your comment? Let me just say that again.
I was interested whether it was a good thing or not if we depart from equality.
It's just a good thing. Genuinely, it's just a good thing. And I'll tell you why, because it's nothing to do with the presentation at all. But it matters, and it comes back to the point of ethics. It matters that you have diversity of decision-making and thought in your organisations, and you start that with gender equality across your organisations, not just in the middle. Anyway, soapbox over. Across the organisation, indeed. So let me start at the big picture. This is something I stole off of the web. I did not make this. But I do want to start at the big picture. There's some really macro issues. The context, the environment in which we're applying both GDPR or any of the ethics questions around use of data, rights of individuals. But fundamentally, I think one of the greatest changes, and I think it's kind of touched on this morning in the panel just before lunch, is the fact that we are now in an economy that is wholly driven. Its growth relies so heavily on the use of data. People have described it as the lifeblood of our economy as it currently stands. And if you look at elements of public policy within government, what are they relying on most? They're relying on us having the capability of using that data, using it well. Question to be discussed maybe in the Q&A is how do we ensure that it is used for a purpose that society has legitimate support for. But I think especially in the emerging industries, and if I think just about law, there's a huge amount of conversation at the moment about the way in which law will change, not just the law itself, so things like liabilities of the self-driving car, but also the practice of law. Those emerging technologies are changing the face of that profession wildly, beyond most people's imaginations. And if I'm honest, talking unofficially, most people don't really even accept that that might be the case, that these sorts of versions of reality will come about. They will. What I can't tell you is the time frames. But I think that's fundamentally important in understanding the way in which people are responding. But I do think whatever we do with the use of data to grow our economy, to help people make better choices, if you're data mining to ensure that cancer is better detected, that's a great thing, so long as it's available to all and not just those who can pay. Right? There are ethical questions that sit below every single work stream that relies off of data. And that's why I think GDPR has this positive, beneficial, and to the point that I think someone made earlier, which is it anti-innovation, anti-growth? No, not if we choose to grow in the right sorts of ways. We just have choices. But as a piece of regulation always has an impact. So what I didn't declare is I've been a regulator for 20 years. This is my first job where I don't actually regulate anyone. I'm feeling quite bereft. I don't quite know what to do with that. So I'm taking it out on my poor husband at home and the kids, and they're not listening. They're just really seriously lacking in compliance teams. I'm running out of options, those guys, so if anyone has any advice for a bereft regulator, please talk to me in the sidelines. But genuinely, sometimes the impact of regulation can be monumental, and I think the question before lunch was also really quite interesting. I can't remember who asked it, of Elizabeth, which is this a major change, or is it just a step up, or is it just tinkering? And I think that kind of depends on where you are. I think it depends on who you are. Remember, that, and I'm talking broadly through the perspective of my membership, but I think it's apply across all industries. But just think about those people I just described. The solicitor working in a refugee centre. Right. I wonder what their control systems look like. Guessing this might feel more fundamentally different than it has in the past. Versus, we had Cliff Chance hosting, so let's just name them as one. Cliff Chance, actually, their response will be slightly different. I'll come on to, though, practically what that feels and looks like. And I've implemented major regulatory reforms. I've implemented brand new regulatory arrangements, regulated, unregulated communities, and the impact has been huge. Or it can just be a drop in the ocean. Small little spot, just tweaking a little bit. But regardless of whichever way you choose to view GDPR, you have to accept that it has and it will have an impact. And we just need to understand within your own organizations, within each sector, what that impact is likely to look like. And I think it's really quite important to think about, in many ways, the impact of regulation on those who are at the receiving end in a business perspective. So regulation is great, I would say that. 20 years made a career out of it, it's a good thing. But look, most regulatory arrangements don't come to fruition at day one with a complete picture, with every single question answered. So loads of people, certainly in my profession, have come to us as a membership body, as a professional body, and said, do you have the answer for? We need some guidance on. We're not quite sure how to interpret this bit of the GDPR. Yeah, you know what? Neither do we yet. We might do in time, but that is to be expected for two reasons. Mainly because until the rubber hits the road, you actually really never know how it's going to work out. You need to practice, you need to live it, you need to breathe it, you need to have experienced it, and there needs to be at least some exposure to the enforcement response and so on. You just don't know any of that when it's still basically black and white on a page. And secondly, there is this issue of just pure perceptions. There might be absolute clarity, actually, but it might just be perceived as unclear because there's some fear factor. And both of those put together, in summary, create an environment of uncertainty. And that uncertainty has a chilling effect on business. We know this. Investors do not like uncertainty. Businesses don't like uncertainties. Boards don't like uncertainties. My team really don't like uncertainty. Give me a business plan, Sophia. Tell me exactly what you want to deliver and how you want it delivered, and then I'll do it. And it's invariably the comfort zone for most of us, and definitely for organizations. And the success of something like the application of GDPR in being able to somehow limit that uncertainty, you can't eliminate it, and I don't think anyone should seek to, but to mitigate it, is to try and focus on understanding the areas of greatest uncertainty and asking really honest questions about, can we do anything particularly helpful? The greatest danger, I think, around the uncertainty, apart from the fact that you have a bit of a chilling effect, is what people's responses to the uncertainty. Some people, hypotheses, go, okay, uncertain, we'll try to work it out, we'll get some advice, we might hire someone if we can, don't forget, some people don't have the money to do that. Others might just be a bit scared. And I'll be truthful, I've spoken to many of those, bit scared, bit fearful. Response to fear, flight, otherwise known as burying head in sand. Also not a good option, but feels perfectly doable if you think no one's going to have you on their radar. And I do think, actually, if Elizabeth was still here, I would say, they're the sorts of folk that we might want to be focusing and getting their experiences a little bit more, getting the granular effect of that. So if I just left you hanging on that chilling picture, felt like London a couple of weeks ago, didn't it? But, just hold that moment. And the reason I've picked up on that is I've spent the last year travelling the length and breadth of England and Wales, talking to my members of the profession, those 170,000, not every single one of them, I promise, but in their focus groups. And that is a general sense. Thematically, uncertain. Thematically, quite a lot to do. Thematically, it's going to differ depending on my circumstances. Hold that. Think about that. Every single organisation that's also dealing with GDPR is also dealing with this. Each one of them, the refugee centre, the mid-tier in the old regional high street who's doing SME work for people supplying goods across Europe, for Clifford Chance, who are doing a major 3-jurisdiction merger, and the in-house organisation whose board is basically saying to the GC, I need an answer. Give me an answer today on how to deal with this. There's no answer. But what it's doing is building a background policy context and a business context, an industry context of uncertainty. It's really worth knowing and feeling and really, I think, digesting that and accepting that is the backdrop. GDPR is not the only thing that people are dealing with. And Brexit has them jittery. Uncertainty is almost raging in some people's organisations. Others have it broadly under control, but let's not fool ourselves that the bandwidth in organisations doing much else at the top is probably not that wide. So some examples of GDPR-specific uncertainties. We've spoken, the adequacy arrangements, for instance, are a really good example. So will we, when we exit, will we get that adequacy decision? I wonder what they'll make of the Investigatory Powers Act that we did lobby against, by the way, and we did get some amendments on privilege, but it's really important. There's currently the data protection bill. There's some curtailments of data subjects' rights there on immigration control grounds. I have my own personal view as to whether or not that was right or wrong, but we also have a policy view at the Law Society which those sorts of rights should not be undermined. But they will affect the ultimate decision of the way in which we're treated as a third country, and that's still unclear. At the macro Brexit level, market access. So if you're a law firm, a lawyer, an individual solicitor in England and Wales, you have no idea at the moment whether or not you can just freely go and operate in Europe. At the moment, you can just do that. But actually in the future, that might be the case of we, the Law Society, having to strike 27 market access agreements with each individual state. That's a degree of complexity. That's going to mess up your business models pretty significantly if we get it wrong. So, and I mention this because this quote's lovely. I don't really want to get into a philosophical neuroscience conversation of the brain's capability of dealing with complexity, but the message I want us to take away from this is the organisational capability of dealing with multiple, large, complex questions has a natural limit. And each one of those limits will be dependent upon both your organisational culture, the size of your organisation, the business in which you're in, and so on, but each one has its upper limit. And certainly the experience that I have picked up from my members is that this really is having an impact, both in terms of what they can do to prepare for GDPR, but actually, and I think this will resonate with our last speaker's comments, with emotional attachment to. So go beyond compliance. How do you get there? When you believe it. And why do you believe it? Because you think it's a good thing. Why do you think it's a good thing? Because you have a positive experience. Well, I was probably feeling not very positive at the moment, probably feeling a bit tough. I would love to say I did this, I didn't. It's beautiful, isn't it? Actually, I need to name check it because it clearly must have IP on it. It was by a chap called Neil Patrick on a website called Digilist Magazine. And it seeks to, it's a really neat piece of infographics, seeks to unpack the interconnectedness between each element of the GDPR. That, actually, as an infographic, probably is a good representation of how some of the members I speak to feel. Right? I should probably hold it up as a card and then and look at their pupils and their sweat rate and stuff. If I was into that kind of thing, I'm not. But that's not a bad representation. It's a neat way of looking at it. And even if this complexity is sort of over-egged, it's not actually the reality that matters, but the perception. How many of you here have ever done 360 feedback? had someone give you feedback? Okay, all right, about a third. And of that feedback, I'm not going to ask you to share, unless you want to. Sometimes you'll receive stuff that you think, oh, God, that's really not what happened. And what do they tell you when they train you for 360 feedback? Every perception matters, even if it's not the one that you had, because feedback only is something worth doing if you really hear what people are telling you, what their version, what their lens on reality looks like. In the same way as if I'm saying that quite a few of the profession, and this will be as relevant to other professions as it is in the law, feel a bit like this, that's worth us thinking about. But I think, I can't remember who it was, someone on the panel earlier, it might have been our colleague from Clifford Chance, saying that despite this level of complexity, despite the bandwidth being stretched, despite the broader policy context being uncertain, the response to GDPR is not, how do we get out of it? It really isn't. I've not had one conversation where someone said, can I just not do this? When I first arrived, there were some people that said, we voted out. Does that mean, and I was like, no, you're still going to have to do it. You're going to trade in Europe? Yes, we are. Okay, get on with it then. The response has always been, okay, how do we make it work? What's the right way to get compliance? I'm going to move on very quickly, because it's the other piece of the equation is the government policy environment. So the industrial strategy, some of you probably have read it, but the only thing you really need to know is it's heavily focused on our industrial growth, our digital economy, being driven by data. It has 4 major challenges. All of those rely on both tech, AI, machine learning in its broadest of senses. But in order to do that well, it matters that we have a corporate culture that delivers the promise of the industrial strategy, whether you agree with it politically or not. The fact of it is we're going to need an economy that is vibrant, that delivers for society, that allows us to prosper as a nation. And that comes with some responsibilities, and it comes with rights for the individual. And the GDPR is a mechanism by which we do that. And whether or not GDPR will accomplish that will be, I'd also like to claim I did this, I didn't. It's down here on there. It will be an evolution. We're currently in phase 1, in my opinion, which is about raising awareness. Most of my firms, I can cut them into 3, I can say the majority of people I speak to are all about getting the basic systems in place, raising awareness, training up their staff to the basic level. This is what you need to know. The next phase, come the 25th of May, will be around implementation, and everyone will watch ICO like a hawk. What do we want? What do you want to deal with uncertainty? You want certainty. You want to know exactly what the regulator means by X, Y, and Z. And the third phase, and this is the bit that I can't predict how long at all, is maturity. And the success of maturity of GDPR, which is what I really hope in my profession we get to, is where actually compliance is there, sure, because compliance is your systemic way of ensuring a regulatory arrangement works. But what you want is an ethical response where the moral compass of each organisation, regardless of what it is, believes in the values that underpin the GDPR in its first instance. And if you can get that, then we've got something that looks like a success. But that maturity is going to take time. I'll leave it there, Hatan, if that's all right.